There is a silence that follows certain people everywhere they go. Not the silence of an empty room. Not the silence of a slow afternoon. This is a different kind of silence. It follows you into a crowded restaurant. It follows you into a family gathering. It follows you into a room full of people who are laughing, talking, and connecting. And yet, you sit there, surrounded by every sign of life, and you feel completely alone. Maybe you have felt that. Maybe you feel it right now. And if you have ever kneeled down in the dark, in the middle of the night, and asked God why you always seem to end up alone, then this message was written for you. Because what most people call loneliness, God calls preparation. Let me say something bold right at the start. Not every person who ends up alone got there because they failed. Not every person who loses friends, who watches their social circle shrink down to almost nothing, who goes days or even weeks without a deep conversation, is doing something wrong. Some people are alone because God put His hand on their life. And when God puts His hand on your life, He starts moving things around. He starts clearing out the clutter. He starts removing people, situations, and distractions that would slow you down. And from the outside, it looks like loss. It looks like rejection. It looks like your life is falling apart. But from where God is standing, He is not tearing your life apart. He is building it. He is just building it in a direction that most of the people around you cannot see yet. Here is the thing about American culture. We are obsessed with connection. We measure success by how full our social calendar is. We measure worth by how many people show up for us. We believe that if you are well liked, you must be doing something right. And if you are alone, there must be something wrong with you. We scroll through our phones and see other people at dinners, at celebrations, at cookouts, and birthday parties, and road trips. And we wonder why our life does not look like that. But I want to challenge that idea today. I want to challenge the belief that being surrounded by people is always a sign of blessing. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing in your life is the wrong crowd. And sometimes the most loving thing God can do is clear them out. Think about some of the greatest figures in history. Think about the ones who changed the world, who walked into impossible situations and refused to back down. Almost every single one of them had a season of deep, painful solitude before their breakthrough arrived. Before Moses led anyone, he spent 40 years in the desert. Not 40 days, 40 years, away from everything. Away from the palace he grew up in, away from the people he tried to help. Just silence, sand, and the presence of God. Before David was ever crowned king, he was running. He was hiding in caves. He was rejected by Saul, hunted like an animal, misunderstood by his own men. And it was in those dark hiding places that he wrote some of the most powerful words ever put on paper. Before Jesus walked into his public ministry and turned the world upside down, he went into the wilderness alone for 40 days. No followers, no crowds, no applause, just silence, testing, and a direct encounter with the divine. God has always used solitude as a furnace, and the people He calls for something greater almost always have to pass through it. So if you are in that furnace right now, if you are in that season of isolation where the phone stops ringing and the friendships grow cold and you cannot seem to connect with the people around you, I want you to hear this. You are not being punished. You are being processed. There is a difference between rejection and refinement. Rejection is when God does not want you. Refinement is when God cannot yet use you at the level He intends. Refinement means He sees something in you that has not been fully developed yet, and He knows that it will never develop in the comfortable noise of a crowd. He has to get you alone. He has to strip away the distractions. He has to silence the voices around you so that the one voice that matters, His voice, can finally be heard clearly. Now, I want to be honest with you here, because this message is not meant to be comfortable. It is meant to be true. Some of you are telling yourself that you are in a season of divine isolation, when really, you are just avoiding people. Some of you are calling your pride discernment. Some of you are calling your bitterness spiritual sensitivity. That is not what I am talking about today. There is a big difference between someone who is genuinely being set apart by God and someone who is just hiding from the world and calling it sacred. Here is how you know the difference. When God is the one doing the separating, you feel a pull toward Him. Even in the loneliness, even in the pain, something keeps drawing you back to prayer, to reflection, to searching for purpose. You are not content to just sit in your isolation. Something inside you is restless for something more. Something inside you knows that the aloneness is temporary, that it is pointing somewhere. That restlessness is the fingerprint of God on your life. But if your isolation feels like nothing more than numbness, if it leads you away from God rather than toward Him, if it makes you bitter rather than better, then that is something different. That needs to be addressed. That needs healing, not celebration. So check your heart as we keep going. Be honest with yourself. For those of you who are genuinely in that season of divine separation, I want to tell you what is actually happening beneath the surface of your life. God is building your roots. In nature, the strongest trees are not the ones that grew the fastest. They are the ones that grew through the hardest conditions. When a tree faces drought, when the soil is dry and resources are scarce, the roots are forced to go deeper. They push further down into the earth, searching for water, searching for nutrients. And because of that pressure, because of that scarcity, those roots grow stronger than any roots grown in comfortable conditions. That is what God is doing in your life right now. The loneliness you are experiencing is not wasted. The quiet nights are not empty. The friendships that faded out are not just losses. Every single one of those experiences is pushing your roots deeper into faith, into trust, into an intimacy with God that no comfortable life could ever produce. And the reason that matters is this: when your moment arrives, when the doors begin to open and the calling on your life begins to unfold, you are going to need roots like that. You are going to face pressures, opposition, betrayal, and doubt. And the only thing that will hold you steady in those moments is the depth of foundation you built during the quiet years. The years when no one was watching. The years when no one was cheering. The years when it was just you and God and the wilderness. Let me talk about something that a lot of people are afraid to admit. Some of you have tried to maintain friendships that were not good for you. You have bent yourself into different shapes trying to fit in with people who were never meant to walk with you long term. You have dumbed yourself down, lowered your standards, laughed at things that made you uncomfortable, stayed quiet when something needed to be said, all because you were terrified of being alone. And God, in His love and in His wisdom, has been gently, and sometimes not so gently, removing those connections. Not because He is cruel, but because He can see something you cannot see. He can see where those connections lead. He can see the ceiling they put on your growth. He can see the way that certain relationships are slowly draining the very spiritual energy you need for the assignment He is preparing you for. He is not taking from you. He is protecting you. There is an old saying in the American South, "Show me your friends, and I will show you your future." God believes that too, and sometimes, when He looks at the people you are surrounding yourself with, He knows that staying connected to them will cost you the very thing He has been building inside of you. So He creates distance. He creates silence. He creates situations that make it hard to maintain those connections. And yes, It hurts. Of course it hurts. Loss always does. But there is a pain that leads to death, and there is a pain that leads to growth. What you are experiencing is the second kind. I want to talk about spiritual frequency for a moment, because I think it explains something that a lot of people experience but cannot quite put into words. Have you ever been in a conversation and you just felt like you were on a completely different wavelength than the person you were talking to? Not because either of you was bad or wrong, just because you were operating from two completely different places. You were thinking about purpose and meaning, and they were talking about surface-level drama. You were trying to go deep, and they just wanted to stay shallow. That disconnect is real, and it grows wider the more you pursue God. As you grow spiritually, as your understanding deepens, as your values become clearer, and your purpose becomes more defined, you will naturally find that fewer and fewer people can match where you are. That is not arrogance. That is just the reality of growth. You cannot grow into a deeper level of awareness and still be fully satisfied with the same conversations you had 5 years ago. The same way a college professor cannot go back to being fulfilled by 5th grade math. It is not about superiority. It is about evolution. And when that happens, when the gap grows between you and the people around you, it can feel like rejection. It can feel like you no longer belong anywhere. But what it really means is that you are being called to a different level. And at that level, the right people will eventually find you. God will connect you with people who are walking the same road, who carry the same fire, who speak the same language of purpose. But you have to be willing to endure the gap. You have to be willing to walk through the transition period without abandoning the growth, just to avoid the loneliness. That is one of the hardest things God will ever ask of you. Let me say something directly to those of you who have been deeply wounded by people. Some of you are not just lonely because of circumstance. You are lonely because you have been hurt. You trusted someone and they broke that trust. You gave your heart and had it handed back to you in pieces. You showed someone your real self and they used it against you. And now the walls are up. Now you hold people at arm's length before they can get close enough to do it again. And part of you calls it wisdom. Part of you calls it self-protection. But God is asking you today to let Him heal that. Not to tear the walls down recklessly. Not to go back to trusting the wrong people with the wrong things, but to let Him into the wounded places so that your solitude becomes healing instead of hiding. Because there is a difference between the solitude of preparation and the solitude of fear. And God wants to take your solitude of fear and turn it into something holy. He wants to use the very wounds that closed you off to teach you a level of compassion and discernment you could never have developed any other way. Your pain has a purpose, but only if you bring it to Him. Here is a truth that might be the most counterintuitive thing in this entire message. You are never more yourself than when you are alone with God. Not alone with your phone. Not alone with Netflix. Not alone with your thoughts running in circles. Alone with God. In prayer. In silence. In honest, unfiltered conversation with the Creator who made you and knows you better than you know yourself. In those moments, the performance stops. The mask comes off. You stop being who everyone else needs you to be. And you start discovering who you actually are. And that discovery, that deep, sometimes uncomfortable, always transformative discovery of your true self in the presence of God, is something that cannot happen in a crowd. It requires solitude. It requires stillness. It requires the kind of quiet that most of us spend our entire lives running away from. But when you finally stop running, when you finally sit down in the silence and let God meet you there, that is when the real work begins. Now I want to talk about what comes after the wilderness, because this message is not meant to leave you sitting in isolation forever. The wilderness is not your destination. It is your training ground. And every training ground eventually produces someone ready to step onto the field. There is a moment in every chosen person's journey where the preparation phase ends and the deployment phase begins, where the loneliness transitions into a community of people who were also in the wilderness, who were also being refined, who were also waiting for their moment. And when those people find each other, it is unlike anything you have ever experienced in a shallow crowd, because these are not surface-level connections. These are soul-deep bonds forged in the fire of shared purpose. These are people who understand you without explanation, who lift you without envy, who challenge you without tearing you down. God is not taking your capacity for connection away from you. He is protecting it until He finds worthy vessels to pour it into. But here is the part that requires courage from you. You have to resist the temptation to settle. When the loneliness gets heavy, the easiest thing in the world is to reach for whatever connection is available, even if it is not healthy. Even if you know, deep down, that the person, or the group, or the relationship is not aligned with where God is taking you, you will be tempted to go back to old friendships that the Lord already closed. You will be tempted to water yourself down just enough to fit in somewhere, anywhere, because the alternative feels like more than you can bear. Do not do it. Every time you settle for a connection that was not meant for you, you delay the arrival of the ones that were. God cannot bring the right people into a space that is already full of the wrong ones. And when you keep going back to what He has already separated you from, you are essentially telling Him that you do not trust His plan. Trust the plan, even when it is lonely. Especially when it is lonely, there is something powerful that happens when you stop performing for people and start living for God alone. Your entire energy shifts. The anxiety about what people think of you starts to fade. The exhausting effort of maintaining an image, of saying the right things, of being whoever the room needs you to be, it all starts to fall away. And in its place grows something solid, something quiet and unshakable. A confidence that does not come from applause or approval. It comes from knowing who you are. It comes from spending enough time with God that His opinion of you drowns out everyone else's. It comes from a daily practice of bringing your real self, your fears, your doubts, your failures, your dreams, into His presence and hearing Him say, over and over again, I know you. I made you. You are enough. You are mine. That kind of security cannot be built in a crowd. It can only be built in the quiet places, in the early mornings before the world wakes up, in the late nights when everyone else is asleep and it is just you and Him, in the long drives with no music, just your thoughts and His presence filling the silence. That is where the real transformation happens. Let me close with something that I want you to carry with you long after this message ends. God does not waste a single moment of your pain. Not the friendship that ended without explanation. Not the family member who does not understand you. Not the job that fell apart. Not the relationship that broke you. Not the season of isolation that felt like it would last forever. Not a single moment. He takes every one of those experiences and He uses them. He uses them to shape your character, to deepen your empathy, to sharpen your discernment, to build the kind of faith that cannot be shaken by circumstances because it was forged in the middle of them. The loneliness you walked through, it was not wasted time. It was the most productive season of your life. You just could not see the production happening because it was happening below the surface, below the visible, in the hidden places where God does His best work. And here is where I want to land this. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not unloved. You are not forgotten. You are chosen. And chosen people go through things that ordinary paths do not require. Not because God is cruel, but because the assignment on your life demands a level of preparation that comfort could never produce. Your loneliness was not a mistake. It was an investment. God was depositing things into you during the silence and the stillness and the solitude that you will spend the rest of your life drawing from. Wisdom you could not have gotten from a book. Compassion you could not have gotten from ease. Intimacy with God that you could not have gotten from anything except walking through the fire alone with Him by your side. That is what the wilderness produces. That is what the silence builds. That is what the loneliness, when it is surrendered to God, becomes. It becomes a foundation. It becomes an anointing. It becomes the story that changes someone else's life when you finally tell it. So if you are in the wilderness today, I want you to stop fighting it. Stop begging people to stay who were never meant to. Stop forcing connections that the Lord has already released. Stop measuring your worth by how many people are in your corner. Stop scrolling through other people's highlight reels and wondering why your life looks so different. Your life looks different because your calling is different. Your path is different. Your story is different. And that difference, the very thing that makes you feel out of place in ordinary circles, is the thing that God is going to use to do something extraordinary. You were not made to blend in. You were made to stand out. Not for your own glory, but for His. And the way He makes you stand out is by pulling you apart from the crowd and doing something inside of you that the crowd never got the chance to interrupt. Here is my final word to you. Embrace the silence. Do not just endure it. Embrace it. Let the quiet nights become conversations with God. Let the empty spaces become sanctuaries. Let the seasons when no one is calling you become seasons when you learn to hear the voice of the one who is always calling you. Always, without fail, without condition, without ever needing to hear from you first. He called you before you knew His name. He set you apart before you knew your own purpose. He has been walking with you through every desert, every cave, every silent night, not from a distance, right beside you. And when your time comes to rise, when the preparation season gives way to the purpose season, when the doors begin to open and the calling on your life begins to unfold, you will look back on these lonely years and you will understand. You will understand why the silence was necessary. You will understand why the people had to leave. You will understand why God was so committed to getting you alone with Him, because what He was building in the secret place could not have been built anywhere else. And what He built in you, in the quiet, in the dark, in the wilderness, is going to change the world. Walk boldly, chosen soul. Walk without apology. Walk without fear. You were never truly alone. God was with you every single step of the way, and He still is.